You're tuning into the Active Mom Podcast with physical therapist, Dr. Carrie Pagliano, a real mom's guide to all things postpartum return to workouts after baby. If you're a postpartum mom, coach, trainer, or physical therapist looking for answers on how to get back to running, CrossFit, yoga, Pilates, HIIT, you name it, without the fear of pelvic floor issues or doing something wrong, this is the podcast for you. Let's start the show. All right. If you are from the DC metro area and you have worked, or if you've been pregnant or postpartum, and you like yoga and Pilates, there's no way you don't know Mind the Mat in Delray and in Arlington. And I'm so excited to have my dear friend Caroline Deitch, who we're going to talk about her resume because she does all the things. Yoga, Pilates. Now she's a doula, but she's a mom of two. And we've just been reminiscing on her daughter who just turned 5. And I remember holding her. But we're going to talk about all things motherhood, yoga, Pilates, mom life, doula life, all that fun stuff. Caroline Deitch, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from. What do you do when people ask you what's your job?
Oh, I feel like, well, I'm from Delaware originally, but I moved to the DMV in 2009 after being in Austin, Texas for a few years. And I loved Austin so much that a lot of people that I met right away thought I was from there because I was so proud. So I'm not actually from Texas. I just lived there for a while. And I live in Alexandria. So as I first moved to the DMV, I found myself in Arlington, and Arlington is wonderful. I know you're there too, but I didn't feel quite at home right away. And it took me a little while to really kind of find my way to a place where I felt like, no, I'm going to stay here for a while. So for a little while, my husband would tell you that I kind of protested, like, maybe we should go somewhere else, anywhere else for a minute. And then we moved south and we moved to Delray eventually. We had our babies there. We eventually moved just 2 years ago during the pandemic further south, just out of Old Town. And we really love it here. So Alexandria is home now. So that's where we hang out a lot. I do teach at Mind the Mat. I teach yoga and Pilates there. I've been teaching since about 2008 because I did my training in Austin when I was there. And I teach a lot of group classes, but a lot of specialized classes too. So some of them are like regular flow or Pilates mat classes, and some of them are therapeutic series, and some of them are prenatal and postpartum specific, including like an after baby core and pelvic floor class, which is just like a catch-all for anyone postpartum. I've had people with 2-week-old babies come to that class, or 3-year-old babies come to that class who are like, is it too late? I've not done anything about this. So I do a lot of referring to Carrie and other, like a lot of recommendations for other really specialized prenatal and postpartum care. But all those classes are always, I always think like, yeah, it sounds like a lot of different things, but it keeps my brain fresh. Carrie and I were just talking about, I always like to have something kind of in my work that's keeping me learning. I feel like that's a constant. So learning more about what I'm already doing, but then learning new ways to serve the same or other populations. I was originally a speech therapist, which is what brought me to Austin to start with. And I worked in home health, pediatrics. And so I think, I was thinking about this, like how I ended up in this place now teaching these like, sort of other things. And I was talking with a friend the other day that my very first breath movement teaching experience was when I was 15, teaching swimming lessons at the YMCA, again with kids. And it's just like, this is always, all these pieces, they like sort of threaded together for a long time. And I took some detours. I think we all need to do that. And now I wouldn't really call them detours. I think they're just sort of funneling me more toward what work feels most fulfilling. Sometimes I joke that I'm like, why did I go to become a speech therapist and not a physical therapist if I was going to be teaching movement? But I also think that, and this comes up a lot when we talk about healthcare and just like what's going on, especially with prenatal and postpartum care, but words really matter. And I think language has always meant a lot to me, and being really mindful of how we use our words. So I think that maybe was the place I needed to spend some time for a while. But yeah, so parent education was a big part of that role. Now working as a doula and childbirth educator, it's like, you know what, I felt like in pediatrics, I was working so much with the parents that really needed to get ahead of some of the issues that were coming up. And at the time, it was pretty frustrating and defeating. The home health kind of rigor is just another thing. Like I was just exhausted and I was 22. So like,
Right.
or no, 24, whatever it was like, what, who am I to be this exhausted in my life? But it was just, it was a lot. So, but I felt like there were a lot of people on my caseload and with the parents that just weren't getting what they needed much, much earlier. And I think that goes all the way back to prenatal education, postpartum care. Where's the village that everybody talks about? Like, how do we get
Right.
invited to the group? I mean, that's that kind of thing. And so I left kind of out of frustration and disappointment, I guess, and even like in the systems and how they don't work a lot of the time. And I was like, oh, I feel guilty. I just invested a whole lot in that. And then I went and taught yoga for a while, which was great. But like, am I kind of giving up? And so now I feel like, 20 years later, on little under 20 years later, like things have come around full circle and there's a little more of an opportunity with what I've chosen to focus on to help people in a different way.
Yeah. No,
So I don't know. That's kind of a roundabout way to say
but
it.
I think it's a great answer because I mean, when I was at Georgetown and working with the therapists there, some of the ones I connected to the most were the pediatric therapists and the speech therapists because there's so much connected to breath. And I think just like looking at the system is a much bigger thing. And I think in speech, you have to look at a lot of different systems. And so I think we had some familiarity there. So for me, it's not weird at all. I'm like, of course you did. And I also find that the people that come from other areas and then bring that influence to their current work, I think it's just so much more rich and not as diluted and straightforward. I think there's nuances that we can learn from other places.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
for you, like where does, your own journey as, a mom to be, where does that fit into all of this and kind of help influence kind of the direction you decided to go in?
Yeah. So I mentioned like teaching swimming lessons as a kid, but I'm one of five, so there were babies around all the time and kids around all the time, and I have lots of cousins, and I found that I gravitated toward babysitting and nannying when I was in grad school, and I was fortunate to work with a couple of families who were like expecting their second, and they were just so open with me about their journey in the prenatal pregnancy realm, through about their births, about even the postpartum recovery. One of them, I mean, I was there days after the second was born
Oh,
and just
wow.
tag teaming with her. And I feel like they were so open with me about like what their experience was like that there was no question in my mind, just given my family history and my experience like that I wanted to be a mom. So that I know that isn't,
Yeah.
everybody's experience, but I was like, yeah, this is totally something I'm going to do. I had spent a lot of time with newborns. I had spent a professional time and, education in studying child development, early child development in undergrad, child psychology, things like that. And I was really, I mean, just always fascinated by it. I had worked in a daycare at one point in college. So it's just like, okay, I want to do that.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that's really interesting is I didn't, going into pregnancy, going into birth, like I was kind of hunting and gathering, as we say, like for content, for information, for what to expect, to be prepared. Also, because my husband had very little child or any kind of experience around kids or infants. So I was like, we need to get him like up to par. Was partly my
It's
goal.
really
Partly my
him,
goal.
right?
I'm like, I know about all this stuff. I need to get him on board, right? During pregnancy, I felt like in a way, I was hunting and looking for the support and what I needed, but I also felt like I wasn't worried because I had spent all this time around kids and babies. I mean, I knew how to swaddle. I had been taught by someone I nannied for to wear the Moby wrap when I was 23. Like I was wearing her baby all around town in like a carrier. She was a medical resident, so she was not around a lot of the time. So I was
Yeah.
like with her baby very early on. So I felt very comfortable with like logistics. How does it look to like run a schedule as a mom? I mean, not from the
Mm-hmm.
inside, but I thought I knew. I thought I knew. That's the big thing.
And then what happened?
And then what happened? So I found that postpartum rocked me from an internal place that
Mm,
I didn't expect. And I think one of the things I feel really strongly about now with childbirth education and with doula work and even teaching prenatal classes, some of this stuff, even though the role of a doula and the role of a childbirth educator is new, like on paper, I feel like I've been kind of doing some of that ever since I went through it. So teaching
mm,
prenatal, I've been teaching those classes for a really long time, teaching mommy and me. And I feel like just like trying to be part of that village or create that and be part of it myself because I needed it.
right.
I feel like just kind of being honest with people about what might happen or what to expect, or just more story sharing, because a
Hmm.
lot of us have been trained not to talk about some of it
Right.
and not to talk about the parts that are hard. And I think that for me, um, the people that shared with me and were like, "Oh yeah, oh yeah, I get it." It was just like, okay, that was very validating, and I think a lot of us just need that to start out
Hmm.
with. And then anyway, so I found that the logistics of parenting, of mothering, of diaper changing, all those like things, okay, what is a baby sleep schedule like? I wasn't worried about that stuff. I didn't feel like that rocked me as much as it might for someone who didn't have a lot of infant experience, but I was like, "Oh, who is this other person that now I feel like
Right.
I have to get to know, which is not the baby, it's me."
It's
Like,
you.
it's
So
me.
I'm curious, because I always tell people, I was like, you know, I very much was that person where my job, like, of course I'm gonna understand what's going on, I'm gonna do this, run into the, delivery room, and this is gonna be all perfect and blah blah blah. And I very much would have people that would be like, "Oh," and people tell you things, but then you walk through the portal and then you
Mhm.
finally hear them.
Yeah.
And I always kind of hesitate now with new moms, and I think it just depends on the person where, are they in a place that they can hear, but then also if you're postpartum talking to somebody in pregnancy, you know, are you honest with them? Do you feel the need to share your war story or your worst case scenario? Like there's this weird
Mm.
kind of exchange of information where it's like, because we do as postpartum, we want to share our story, we want to pay it forward, but like I always think so too, that like everybody's got an opinion on everything as well. So like everybody's got an opinion on diapering and breastfeeding and how
Mhm.
you should deliver and natural birth. Let's not go down that rabbit hole.
Mm.
But like, what are your thoughts kind of about that? Like, how do you balance sharing of information, receiving information, and people that just,
Yeah.
that they're going to go war story style?
Well, and war stories deserve to be shared,
Yeah.
but in the right space. And I say right space, meaning like as a as a doula and as a postpartum someone who works with people postpartum, I'm like, I've done sit down sessions or at home sessions or whatever with new parents who need that processing. Like we
Hmm.
should build that into the care, right?
Yes.
That can be part of the care plan. Like go see Carrie right after you have your baby and also do some birth story processing. Like
Hmm.
let's walk through this with someone who's trained to do it, because telling your mom or your sister or your friend and then talking to your doctor, like that doesn't necessarily cover it.
Yeah.
Instagram and social media make us rush through the processing
Mm.
because we rush to the place where it's like, look, here we are, everything's great. And then it's like really hard to uphold that. So
Mhm.
in my doula training, it's from a group called Birthing from Within. And what I really love about it is it parallels the birth and the pregnancy journey, postpartum journey to the hero's journey.
Mhm.
One phrase that I've heard from parents separate from this, where they're like, oh, I want to get an epidural, or I'm just going to do this because I don't need to be a hero. I'm like, every single one of us is, if you're birthing any which way, you're a hero. That, in my opinion, is
Absolutely.
like
Yep.
amazing, right? So if you carry a baby, like you are a hero. So don't like shy away from that, first of all. But
Right.
secondly, the hero's journey really walks us through these places that are very somewhat predictable, but also the specifics and details about how that unfolds, how the journey itself unfolds, can be really distinct or unique to one person. So I don't think necessarily sharing all the war stories in public in a way is helpful sometimes. I think within processing, we need to do that, but there's a predictable processing that needs to go on from like the early days to 3 weeks later to 3 months later to a year later, that again, like social media and some of what people's expectations culturally or in our families are expecting us to like get on with it already,
Right.
that bypasses a whole lot of that processing. So instead of it becoming just our story, it becomes a war story, right? It
Mm.
becomes this like really loaded thing. I don't say loaded to counter significant. Significant is important. Like we need to spend time on that. But I felt like I did that to myself in a way. Like,
Mm.
and so I'm now really curious. This is where I'm playing a lot in my work, is like, how do I be honest with people about like the plan changes, by the way. You know, you can go, let's create a birth plan, but also it's going to change.
Don't laminate it.
Right. I know that. I know that you laminated
Just
yours.
saying.
I mean, and having someone there to advocate with you and for
Yes.
you is
Yeah.
super helpful. And what that advocating looks like can be distinct to the situation.
hmm
But a lot of times, the advocating also looks like, from my side of things anyway, now, is telling or sharing with the couple at the time, like, this part that you're going through is normal.
hmm
Right? That might be it. It's not saying, it's almost putting their fears aside, or to say, this is a scary situation.
hmm
Like transition during birth is really hard. And everybody thinks they're failing at it. And everybody thinks, I mean, most everybody that goes through it is like, I
Right.
can't do it. I don't want to. Or they
Yeah.
feel like they're in a place they can't get out of. I've heard visual stories like that too. And if we know that we can expect that, or that it might happen like that, it's like, you're going the right way. In fact, it feels
Right.
like we're not going the right way, but in fact, you're going the right way.
Yeah.
This really hard moment is bringing us closer to the goal, not further from the goal. So for me, it's like that kind of honesty is what I'm talking about.
Gotcha.
And the honesty of like, what's actually involved with getting an epidural. I'm a
hmm
fan. I think it's a great tool. I think, that's necessary. C-sections are necessary. And like, what is the timing, and how do we make
Yes.
the discerning choice that that's the right time, the right person, the right situation?
Yep.
Because I think
I
when I got an epidural, I didn't know that I was going to also be strapped to like 7 other things.
right.
And I would have liked to know a little bit before that.
Well, and I love that, you know, having these conversations early, providing a space, prenatal yoga, those sorts of things, like a space, and you're saying, hey, I can be a resource for you. And then also to have the discussions that kind of counter some of the, I don't know, the stereotypes of the mess. I mean, we live in an area where there's a lot of older moms, and we're taught absolutes, and we like absolutes here. Like epidurals are bad, C-section's a failure, like
Hmm.
natural birth, like, you know, that's what you should want, like all of these things. And then
Hmm.
what, having an open discussion of, okay, you've been told this, what does that actually mean? And can we talk about how that might not actually be contributing to the full potential experience? Because what happens
Hmm.
is I see these moms that walk in with these ideas, these older moms that have had control over everything in their life. And I'm saying this from experience,
Hmm.
and then walk out completely devastated because it's not that they didn't prepare, but they like, I don't know if the questions weren't presented in the right way, or that the space wasn't provided for them to ask questions about, okay, well, why do you think these things are bad? Why are interventions? What's the role of that? Like having those conversations in a safe space well before you're in that situation where
Yeah.
you've got somebody telling you, if you don't do this, your baby is in distress. That's not where you can have thoughtful conversations.
No.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So, one of the reasons why this matters so much to me too is because, as I've led, so I also lead yoga teacher training. and 200-hour teacher training, and then the 85-hour prenatal training. I co-lead that. And so in facilitating anything, like, you've done a facilitation.
Yeah.
When you're facilitating training or education, there's more to it than just like an information dump.
Right.
Right. And I found when I was taking but birth education, sometimes it's just like this fire hose of information. And sometimes, especially when it's given by the hospital, it's great that they have those programs, and it's also biased because they're telling you what they want you to know.
Right.
And so I always encourage parents to seek a comprehensive program, something that's going to shine a light on a lot of different things. My own doula said to me, she was like, I did not want to hear anything about C-sections because I was not going to have that. And I was like, yeah, me too. I was totally like that.
No, same.
Too. Like,
same.
oh, I don't need that. So I'm not going to listen for that part. So there are some things that we cannot create for people if they don't want to listen or they don't want to hear that part. Right. However, one of the really important aspects to this kind of stuff is asking questions. Like that's one storytelling is part of facilitation, but also asking questions that allow people space to not have to answer it right now. So why this stands out to me in a big way for this topic is because in yoga, one of the primary things that we're trying to do during any kind of yoga experience is self-inquiry. So svadhyaya means self-study, right? And so this self-inquiry space that we invite people into through an experience. The experience can be asana on your mat. It could be meditation. It could be noticing how your breath moves. It could be literally anything that we do, how we have a conversation or don't have a conversation with our kids after school, like we were talking about. Right?
Yep.
Like, oh, that is where I need to step back. Or, that space of pause and inquiry is huge. And so when I think about working with parents, it's like many of the exercises that we go through in the birth education, are actually like, how do I respond when things get hard? Like, how do we as a couple, if there's a partner, like, how do we make decisions together? What happens if the plan changes? Do these specific topics bring up something in particular? For example, if you phrase it cesarean birth versus C-section, does some different connotation come up? Right. Like, how can we almost like refile these words or these situations, interventions, whatever, but really the expectations for how it will go. Yeah. Because my job isn't to say, we're going to write this birth plan and it's going to go like this, but also we might have to rip it up and throw it out the window. So just deal with it because that kind of sucks. Right. So it's like, hey, we're going to put down the things that are the most important and to like us as a couple or for this birth, but we also have to do some inner work. That's where the yoga philosophy comes in to say, I need to know what in my body from an inner place, how do I respond when this kind of scenario might play out? So that even if the plan changes, because it will, when the plan changes,
of course, it will,
right?
Yeah.
Then I still feel connected to the experience, and I can still leave a scenario that looks really different than how I imagined it to go and feel successful and I don't want to say happy, but like feel like supported. That's really important, right? Empowered. Like these are the things I want people to feel about it. Yeah. Regardless of the details about how it unfolds.
I love this for a bunch of different reasons. One is knowing where we live in the large health systems that are here, knowing that there's rotation of healthcare providers. You don't know who's going to be there. Your favorite person could be off. Your experience could be over several days. Like no one knows this stuff. Like regardless of what happens in that context, you still have ownership and agency and control over processing that experience. Because the one thing I feel like I do run into, and I thoroughly recognize in myself, is we get scared and we think, okay, well, my doctor better do this, or I need to get a doctor that thinks this way. And of course, you're not going to be the person to change their mind. Trust me. And then you become an adversary in an adversarial relationship with your provider. And that's not cool either. But you're saying, okay, regardless of what's going on here, who shows up at the show, I know what's important to me. I know I'm going to be addressed in a challenge. I know that I have a team who's going to help me process this and make the decisions that are the best ones at the time with the information given. And I feel like that allows space so that you're not sitting on the other side and having to process guilt and trauma. And that was something I know I felt after my second. Or my first, sorry, not my second. Second was good. First was very much like, whew, got my kids mixed up here. Was walking out, and again, totally didn't prepare for a C-section, 3-day induction, ended up with a C because he wasn't recovering and not at all where I thought I would be. And it took me a couple of years to kind of process through that. And in retrospect, again, like I'm very conscious of how can we set people up so that they're not sitting there devastated on the other side and everybody's saying you should be happy you have a healthy baby, which that doesn't help either. So
that gets me. I got that the first time too. I think again it comes back to like the words and the bedside manner and the eye contact. Like I saw your post yesterday and it stood out to me too. Like on my 40-week appointment with my first, I was working with a group where I thought I was going to get to just wait and go into labor. And I totally trusted that would happen. And on the 40-week appointment, a new provider I hadn't met yet walked in, all business, with the iPad like in her face, didn't make eye contact, and says, okay, you're at 40 weeks. Let's schedule your induction.
Yep.
And I'm like, hold on a second. That's not why I thought I was here today. And not only have you not introduced yourself, not made eye contact, have no idea who I am or what I care about here. Now I feel sort of manipulated into a situation that has been the opposite of what I wanted to do.
Right.
And something that up until this moment, I was led to believe I would be able to be fine. And I was, 32 and I was at 40 weeks. Like, what's the reason here? So I feel just really upset when we get that kind of care, like your story the other day and those kinds of moments. I mean, the other phrase that stands out to me that does get said all the time, I hear this in the birth room too, and it just makes my ears stand up, is I'm just gonna. Like, no, you're not just gonna do anything. You're not just going to. No, because it's not just for that person who's going through it. And this is part of being trauma informed and like going through situations myself where it's like, no, you're not.
Okay, I'm dying to know logistically. So you're my doula and you hear this and we're in the room together and a doctor walks in and it's somebody we don't know. What do you say? Like, I want to know, like, how do you advocate in that position? I'm just incredibly curious.
So I want to get back to something you said about the birth team, and I'll do that in a second, but I'm just saying that so I don't forget. But okay, so one tricky thing about being a doula is that you're not part of a medical team and you don't work for the hospital, and you are brought there by the person who is birthing. In most situations, there are a couple programs around the country where you could be employed by the hospital, but it's rare. So you are on the birth team of the person who's there. So my number one job is to support the person. It's like my client is the goal, right? So the hospital's agenda, I do and I don't care, because I care mostly about that person and their autonomy and their health and safety and the health and safety of that baby. It is not my job to decide if a C-section is necessary. It's not my job to decide if certain of those kinds of things need to happen, but it is something to be a trained person on this topic in the room with the goal of supporting that person and that baby.
Yeah.
And so the tricky part about it is that you can get kicked out. So even though you're brought there by the person, it's like you don't want to be too pushy about what you do and don't like about what's happening.
Yeah.
But you have to find subtle ways to do that. And I think I'm still figuring that out in certain situations.
I would imagine.
I want to be like, no, you're not just gonna, like, So one of the things that I have talked to parents about ahead of time is, this is sometimes this kind of thing happens. We forget that the providers are in their mode. This is their everyday. They do this all day, all night. Literally, this is what they do. So to them, some of these steps that happen during certain situations, like even just checking your stats, like checking your blood pressure or whatever's going on, adding the monitoring if you're not being, monitored continuously.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those things are just part of the way it goes. But what our job might need to be, and I say this a lot of times to partners, because sometimes the providers respond better to the partner than to me. The advocacy starts way before. So
Right.
I let them know these are some of the things that could, places where we might need to slow them down. Plan on needing to slow your providers down, meaning your doctor that you may or may not know because it's a team, and the nurses that you never met before,
Right.
the anesthesiologist, whoever's coming in the room, and slow them down and say, I would like you to explain that to me. Or I need you to walk me through step by step what we're going to do.
That's so important and very easy for you and I to have that conversation and say those words right now. But in that space, it's so
It is.
freaking hard.
So I can't be like, no, you're not just gonna. I can say,
so you're like kicking them. You're like,
I think it would be really helpful. Can you just take a moment and walk them through this? Right. So I will say something like that in a more gentle phrasing. Like, I think it would be really helpful if they were able to understand the process start to finish.
I like that. I like
So
that.
things like that, like if
Yeah.
you were doing an internal exam, which
Mm-hmm.
I know you do, right? You do internal
Mm-hmm.
work. And then there's a lot of internal, I'm just going to check you. I'm sorry. No, you're not. And that happened to me. And it happened to me at that 40-week appointment. And the phrasing
Yeah.
was, I'm just going to strip your membranes now. And their hand was in my body. And that's not okay.
That's not informed consent at
Not okay.
all.
No.
Oh
And
my
so
God.
informed consent is something that I do in educating on in the
Right.
prenatal segment of things, like whether it be a prenatal class, I'll just drop these
Mm-hmm.
pieces here and there in classes over a months and months,
Mm-hmm.
or it's something I'll talk to specifically with parents about. Not only like, do you not have to let them, but also they should be asking you.
Well, and
So
that's the thing, to take it out of an adversarial kind of framework and be like, let's remind them that, this is pause, slow down. Everybody needs to slow down. And this is where, I think I love my colleagues who are OBGYNs and they're overworked
yeah,
and
they
underpaid and
don't have enough
underappreciated.
time to do the job.
And they don't. And that's where I think, reframing it as we are reminding everyone to pause and take a break and kind of take a timeout from the system, and the
Yeah.
system doesn't need to drive it. Because I really feel awful when people end up in adversarial relationships with their providers, because I don't think people intend to be.
No,
But
and I
I
don't
love.
mean to speak poorly about
No, no, no.
the
I just
providers either. I just think it's the everyday, and
it
part of
is.
it is like, for me, again, it comes back to the study and self-inquiry. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm facilitating a brand new group of trainees,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm working with brand new parents, like
Yep.
part of our job as the person in the room that knows more than they do is
Mm-hmm.
to pace the content, right?
Yes.
That's part of it. And it's also to remember the beginner learner,
Yes. We
right?
forget. We forget that we have done this a million times. And again, for me, going back to my oldest, I gave birth in the hospital I was employed in.
Mm.
The my I had maybe one. Everybody else was somebody that I knew that I rotated through. Unfortunately, the guy that did the C-section was the Saturday guy, and he was the only one I didn't know. But everybody I knew. So I say this in that I respected all of these people professionally. I had worked with them for a long time. It's hard to have these conversations because this is how the system moves.
Yeah.
But just understanding, if you are giving birth in a larger healthcare system, it's not a bad idea to slow things down. Even if it's not a large healthcare system, take your pace. It's good for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Right.
good
And
for
I think that
everybody.
I have had several conversations with people that are close to me, with people that are just clientele that I've worked with
Mhm.
in classrooms or in doula relationships now where they're like, yeah, something about this isn't gelling with me. Like my appointments don't feel connected in the way that I want them to be or whatever. And in none of these situations, the parents are not asking for they're not asking for anything above and beyond, right? They're just asking for the consideration and the respect and the, the rapport that you want to have with someone who's going to be really intimately related to this really important life thing.
Yep.
And at the same time, so, there's people forget that they can choose a different provider. Like you can choose where you get your hair done and you can choose what dentist you go to. Why wouldn't you also make a change if it doesn't feel right? So I feel like the advocacy also starts on that side of things. If someone's at 30 weeks along, and that's when you start to see your provider more often, because before that it might be like, well, I just stuck with my same provider that I had before because
you don't know
whatever. And so you start to see them, you're like, some of these flags are coming up. One of the things that I'll talk about within a group setting, but also one-on-one, is these are some questions that you might want to find out. Like, go get a pulse check on what's their stance on XYZ things. Like, what's the conversation about changing plans look like? What does the, for example, induction is just such a big hot topic right now. And I think it has a lot to do with, like you were saying, a lot of maybe potentially older moms and people who have had careers and things like that. And so they've done other things before they're having their babies. And so because they're quote unquote over 35, geriatric, advanced maternal age, whatever you want to call it, it's like now we are required to do these things. And it's the research doesn't always support that, which thankfully there's more and more getting published on that. But we know it takes forever for any of that to actually be implemented. So when I talk to parents, I'm like, well, if there's not a medically driven reason for that induction, then you can push back and you can ask those questions. But again, induction is great when it's necessary, but it's also like there's a resistance in your body and with your baby. And we don't get to know the whole story because the only person who knows the whole story is baby. And unfortunately, they can't tell us.
Those are, I think you bring up some really good points that one is just, I think, understanding that even though they may have delivered, thousands of babies, you are still an N of not quite yet one. And they don't know what's going to happen with you. You don't know what's going to happen with you. I think that's a relevant point that people forget. I think another is, again, just understanding the process. Do you know how many people think that a pelvic floor pushes out your baby? Like, no, that would be the uterus. The pelvic floor needs to get the hell out of the way. I repeat, the pelvic floor needs to get the heck out of the way. And that's where I feel like we're doing, and you probably kind of playing into this with your doula work too, is more teamwork and collaboration. Like if I have more women that are coming in, and we're understanding either before pregnancy or during pregnancy, any sort of predispositions towards like overactive or high tone pelvic floor. I mean, I had a client recently with Ehlers-Danlos, some bladder issues, definitely overactive pelvic floor issue, and some concerns. We got a doula in play, and we're like, these are the concerns that we have about making sure that pelvic floor relaxes. Early pain management was incredibly important, making sure that she had no reason to kind of dive further into that overactivity. And I feel like, again, the more that we understand and work together collaboratively, like there's no reason the GYN would know that. But how can we pull together? Then I communicate with the doula and like, hey, what positions, what can we talk about? How can we prepare? When do we have this discussion about pain management? Instead of just being like one is good or bad, like, can we be much more targeted? And I would love to see, as we get more collaborative, what do the outcomes look like? Can we get moms set up not only to feel better about their experience, but do we cut down on, moms trying to push through a non-relaxing pelvic floor, a baby not dropping, or, forcing, really long pushing times or things like that. Like, how can we make better decisions based on the information coming in from a multi kind of expert approach?
Yeah. I talk about this a lot in prenatal classes. I know you know a lot of us that mind the mat too. And we're kind of all on board.
I love you. I
but
love
it's
you
like
all.
the dynamic pelvic floor work that we
Mm-hmm.
do in prenatal classes, like talking about that and the why are we doing it like that
Mm-hmm.
is also on that front end of things. And to your point, like individualizing the approach.
Yep.
And like we teach a group class, but it's also like, hey, not everybody's pelvic floor is exactly different, but like we all have different tendencies
And
and we
everyone has
might
a
all
pregnant
need,
pelvic floor.
yeah. And it's like we need to have some understanding about how,
Yeah,
one, basic biomechanics. How does this work? How does it need to be coordinated with breath and movement?
totally.
And unfortunately, like either prenatal or postpartum, both times, I've heard um, stories from clients who are like, oh, my provider told me I shouldn't do Pilates. Now we're talking prenatal specific, postpartum specific,
I
because
know.
and I should just do more planks and Kegels. And I'm like, mm-mm.
No, please
But
don't.
also, and I said, it makes sense that that's what they know. But
Right.
it also, we have to, like, I'm glad you brought that up because let me differentiate for you why this class is specialized and
Yeah.
different, and also offering you more comprehensive care that probably will improve the situation more than
Yeah.
doing those two things, right?
You're so right. I
Uh,
mean, that's right. I mean, I feel like anytime I have a mom that comes in and they're either pregnant or postpartum and they're a mind the map mom, I'm like, already you're one step ahead because a lot of what I'm saying
that's so great.
are going to, no, it just makes my
Yeah.
life easier, to be honest, because it's not they're just going to a Pilates class. It's not they're just going to a yoga class. It's you're getting some additional information on birth and dynamic pelvic floor and all these sorts of things. They understand what a transverse abdominal is. They know that like planks aren't bad. And, there isn't this like good versus evil thing going on. And again, it's that collaborative relationship that allows us to be like, all right, you've got some of the basics. We don't need to unpack that, but it gets us there faster. And again, you
Yeah.
guys are such advocates for early care and, early access and just provide another avenue to allow space for people to ask questions to get them to help sooner. And again, like, and we've had such a great collaborative relationship for such a long time. And, you and I have worked together and again, I just wish it was easier. I wish we could, have cloned babies of teams and things. And I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so on one hand, one of the things that I feel like we do really well is we give our series participants specifically, but people who are doing the specialized classes, this long list of awesome providers. Everything from like pelvic floor PTs carries on there, right? It's like there are different options because some people will only be able to
Right.
do it if there's insurance involved.
Yep.
And then here
Exactly.
are doula groups to look at, and
Yep.
here are prenatal specific chiropractic care or
Yep.
acupuncture care, and my intention with past, like Sarah and I created that list last year. And it's like, how are we not having this before? We'd always like pass along a few recommendations here and there, but now it's like this long
It's
list and
formal. Yeah, it's
it's
formal.
formalized and it's in our prenatal training manual for our other clients or for our other trainees to be able to use as they start to build relationships and teach. But one of the things that I find is most important about that is that I always stress this, and I think this is something that like we all care about, but it needs to be said more often is every single person. I'm going to specify to prenatal postpartum care right now, but every single person, period, for me deserves exceptional care. So
Yeah.
anyone that's on that list is there because they're great at their jobs. If they're not great at their jobs, they're getting taken off the list or they're not adding onto it. So when
Yeah.
parents come in and they're like, I don't know what to do about such and such issue, I'm not going to I can't diagnose and treat them as a PT. That's not my
Yeah.
scope. Like I, I can talk to them about certain things and direct them to the resource
Yeah.
that would be most helpful. But I'm also not going to send them to just anybody. Like
Right.
it feels really important that they know that anyone on that is not just like a Google search. This is
Right.
like this amazing little curated list of people locally that are great at their jobs and they care about that patient care to the level that all of us do.
Yeah.
So that is part of like my point about the creating your team, like you mentioned birth
Yeah.
team. And like, yeah, you might decide to, search out a new provider, but sometimes it's also, so a couple years ago, a while back, I was working in a career where I was encouraged, actually, it was a life coach conversation with a friend who was encouraging me and other people to create like their own board of directors for their life. So if you're going to
Mm,
create a board of directors for your life, like for your goals, for your professional, for your personal, for your financial, for like,
yeah.
who are the people you call in the middle of the night? Because there's got to be one board member for that, right? So there's people that are those allies in doula work and birth ed work. It's like this ally relationship. So you can call it allies, you can call it board of directors, you can call it birth team, but it's like everyone that's on that team should be chosen like for a specific position
Mhm.
and people that you really need on your team.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think sometimes we just default to like, oh, well, I live in, especially in our community, we live in this
Yep.
metropolitan area. There are lots of hospitals, there are lots of providers. They must all
Yep.
be the same quality, is the
Yeah.
assumption. And it's not the truth. So we have to do some discerning and like inquiry
Yeah.
on what are the most important aspects of this relationship for me. And would I appoint them one of those really special spots on my team?
You know what's funny? You mentioned earlier, and I know you've posted about this before. You're like, where's the village and I want the invite.
Yeah.
And I think in a professional context, I think that is something organically understanding. I've known one of your founders for, I don't know, really long time, 20 some odd years, organically for that long because we have a vested interest in our community.
Hmm.
We the advice we give each other, the advice if somebody's referred from Mind the Mat, they get exactly like I would give my own family. Like, and it's not limited to pregnancy, postpartum too. Like I've got moms that are like, I had a mom this year, really awful story. I won't share it, but needed help navigating a unplanned amputation and post rehab. I've had moms that need post cancer rehab, or, hey, do you know somebody that works in sports ortho, or my son screwed up their shoulder? Like, I know all those people. Like, and that's the thing. That's the point is like, you've got the community there that if they don't know, they'll find out for
Yeah.
you, or they'll find the person that's the best fit. I had a colleague of mine that's in Falls Church. She's a PT I've known for a long time. She does pelvic health. She's like, whenever I get a CrossFitter or a yoga Pilates runner, she's like, they're coming to you because I know that's your jam. And I'm like, but that's how the village should be. So I
Yeah.
can't speak to any other, I can't speak to, although I do have I have lots of lactation people too.
Hmm.
Like I can't speak to like some areas, but I think pregnancy, postpartum, we have that village and it's been so carefully curated for so long. And I think we're aware of it. We protect it. We want to, but how do you translate that to somebody that may not be aware that these lovely little gems of curated lists have been so carefully created to make a good experience for somebody?
Yeah. I do think so. I feel like I got wrapped into that, thankfully, because
You
of the
did,
community that
yeah.
and I feel like, oh, I feel connected to it as a
Hmm.
participant, but also as somebody who gets to provide in that space
Right.
or offer,
Yeah.
in that space. But one of the reasons that I post about that and ask that question sometimes is like a little bit because it's a little bit funny because, historically, traditionally, you would have this village, truly, right?
Yeah.
And everybody's like, it takes a village, but like, how do you get in? And so, but, our, there's a lot more to like sort of the history of how all of our stuff got mixed up with birth in this country anyway. But
Right.
I think that there's so much that got lost even in like our family traditions.
Hmm.
Some people, feel disconnected from their ancestral relationships and just kind of understanding that like there's a reason why we feel a little mixed up and confused and
Hmm.
there's a lot of layers to it. So
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
one hand, absolutely finding the right providers is one aspect of that, and it's also like just the honesty of one mom to another being like,
Hmm.
yeah, that was hard for me too. So one of the things that comes up in class sometimes, and like I just started a new postpartum series last week, the question that I asked them that day, just depends on the week when we ask the question or what it is. But that was just like, what's one thing that surprised you about this experience?
Yeah.
And that space where there's 20 of them at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday talking across the room, being like, yeah, I didn't know babies were so gassy. Or I didn't know that, you know, my partner would be, this kind of parent, or I didn't know that postpartum depression would feel like this. Like those
Yeah.
are the honest conversations that get to happen in that space that feel like
Yeah.
they're the real honesty, that I'm not saying, here's what you should expect. Here's the worst story. But it's
But you
like
create
they're getting to
space.
talk.
Yes.
It's a space creation. So
Yeah.
that kind of honesty is the village feeling. That's also,
Yes.
then I send the provider list. I'm like, this is stuff to look at in
Yeah.
the middle of the night instead of Google. Don't
Right.
WebMD yourself. Like,
Yes.
go ask a professional. These are all excellent,
But that's where
and
there's
yeah.
so much value in, I think, people are like, okay, what should I do postpartum? And I'm like, go where your community is.
Yeah.
If you don't have one, you need to be around other moms that are going through the shit that you're going through.
Yeah.
And I think you guys create such a great space for that. But the other thing, kind of jumping forward years, and you might be getting into this now a little bit. I had the coolest conversation with my mom yesterday. My
Mm,
mom said, actually, tomorrow's her birthday. Happy birthday,
mm,
mom.
mhm,
And she's going to be 76. I don't know. And we got to talking about menopause. I've never talked hormones with my
mm,
mom before. I vaguely remember a lot of the stuff that she went through. She was going through it around the time that there was all the crappy research on hormones causing breast cancer and all this crap, and kind of what she, like, we talked about last night, what she went through and all of that. And I remember part of it as a kid, but like, sit down and have, like, ask your mom what the hell happened, and hopefully you have
mhm,
a relationship with a woman in your life that you can sit down and process that. But I remember my mom at the current age I'm at now, and it
mhm,
means a hell of a lot even now to have those conversations with other women, related or not, where you're like, wow, you get that, you went through something, help me, like, and just being
mhm,
heard. And so I always, again, it's so important to be in a space that's created for you so that you can feel heard. And I feel really bad because I
yeah.
interrupted you to say that, so I didn't
No.
mean to.
No, you didn't. No, it's so true, but I think that, again, it comes back to, like, question asking. Like, what questions
Yes.
are we asking our providers to
Yeah.
find out if they're on the same team? What questions are we
Yes.
asking our parents about their birth stories or about their menopause experience or their,
Mhm.
parenting journey? I think that, like, a lot of times the inquiry, again, it comes back to that part. It's like self-inquiry, but also inquiry
Mm.
around us that
Yeah.
helps to solve or resolve some of the issues. And
Yeah.
I think back to Emmy's birth, and it was very different. I remember, first of all, I was much more proactive. I planned to see you. I planned to see you like
We did, we planned
before
everything
she was
ahead of time.
born.
Yep. Yep.
I was like, okay, I'll see you at X amount. And then she was 2 weeks late. By the way, like, I've learned that people
What else?
hearing the term guest date is new. It's like, it's a guess.
Oh,
That's
okay.
it. Right.
Cool.
So she was late. And so I saw you before I went back to the midwife group
Mhm.
that I was seeing. And it was like, I actually think that was great. It was exactly what I
Yeah.
needed, because you know what? That postpartum visit is very uneventful and most of the time underwhelming because not a lot happens. And
Mhm.
it comes back to the idea that, like, we put so much pressure, but like,
Mm.
we put so much on those visits with the providers if they're supposed to
Yes.
be everything for us.
Yep.
So something you said earlier reminded me of that. It's like, they're not your childbirth educator. They can't
No.
be. That's just not their job. Their scope is
Mm-mm.
this, to help you move through these parts of the pregnancy, but it's not the whole picture. So a lot of times,
No.
like, oh, I will hear from parents, I'm just going to do whatever my doctor says. They know what they're doing. They'll tell me everything I need to know. And I'm like, no, they won't. And not because they don't necessarily want to, but because they can't. So having the multitude of resources,
Yep.
having the multiple places to get your information, and
Mhm.
credible sources, of course, right? But then also knowing what questions to ask so that you can direct the
Yes.
conversation a little bit. Like, that's
Mhm.
a responsibility that we have as the patient. So, one on the second side of things, like with Emmy, I had just, I won't go into Jack's birth story, but I felt like I wanted a different plan. I wanted a different
Yeah.
provider. I needed a new team.
Yep.
That was really essential to me moving into Emmy. So when I was working with that birth team, I had this midwife from GW who was just awesome. I saw her, she brought up a lot of stuff that I realized I didn't process the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And she just did it in such a caring, compassionate, space-making way during one of my appointments with her. And that was a total game changer. Like that let my body also just like let go of whatever I was holding on to from the first time. And we subconsciously do that and don't realize it. So then I moved forward a couple months to the birth, and she was like there more than I've ever seen anybody be at a birth. So I feel very lucky. I think maybe there weren't a lot of people having babies that day, but she was with me a lot. We also had a doula, but I felt like she was kind of mindfully in charge of the scenario and would like kind of boss me around in the best way. I usually say like,
love it.
She needs this, like we need to change positions, like that's also sometimes the doula's role. But anyway, she came up to me and got really close at one point and was like, this is what you wanted. You're doing it. Like you're like that validation that like you're moving toward this exactly as you should. And it feels like too much, or it feels scary, or whatever the things I was saying at the time, And I felt like the result and the way that I got to be empowered through that scenario was totally different. That's that bedside manner, eye contact, being pushed when you need to push, but also being like led with space when you need space. So one of the questions she had brought up with the earlier appointment was like, well, how do you want this to go? Like just the idea that I got to say, because no one had asked that before, right? And so then it brought up all that stuff. But afterward, the day after, she comes and sits on my bed in the postpartum recovery room. And she says, how do you feel about your birth? And again, it's a question. She doesn't have an agenda. She doesn't need to have a way that she walks out of the room. She's not doing it because of a hospital survey. Like she's just there asking a question.
Yeah.
And again, it's space, it's inquiry, it's leaving me an opportunity to reflect, even if I didn't even answer her at the time.
Right.
It was the invitation to look. So I just felt like that, to me, that birth was very different for a variety of reasons, even logistics. But the point being like that the care team made the big difference.
Yeah.
And that attitude and that kind of like one-on-one space was really significant. And so for me, I'm like, I want everybody to know that that's possible. You can absolutely just move through it. You can just, show up and see what happens. I mean, absolutely. That is just what happens sometimes.
Right.
Some people are like in the elevator and their baby's half out way out. Like it's just like, it's going to go how it goes.
I
there's a space
love
you can make.
how there's such overlap between kind of what you're saying, kind of creating this team and this experience and creating space and just principles of yoga. And it's funny because again, I PT, you come from a space, yoga is for flexible people and Pilates is not. And I was really fortunate to have early Pilates experience, kind of understand what that was, and really turn to yoga. Between our kids, we had a miscarriage, and that was me finding that space. And I've been pretty open about it. And I think there's so much to be said for that. And that's what I do love when people are like, should I do prenatal or postpartum yoga? I'm like, if you want to move and this, it seems like it would be, an opportunity that would work for you logistically, it's just a great opportunity to provide space, and you fill it with such great questions. So I think it's such a lovely marriage of, all the things that you've kind of learned and experienced, and you could say so much, but sometimes saying so little and pausing can mean more than anything in a lot of different circumstances and ways. So
and I think that
super cool.
Yoga gives us a space to like permission to re-access our choice. Like for me, that's what it always provides. So there's space to reflect, there's space to take care of yourself in whatever way that needs to be that day. And I think that for me, that part of it, that self-inquiry, that space making, the rest, that part of it is what also really helps with parenting.
Yeah.
Just say for my limited couple of
we
years.
could do a whole nother episode on that one.
So it's like, okay, how do I use these tools in prenatal? Then translate them.
Very
Like that
much
is
so.
that perspective, that headspace, right? But then Pilates for me, given some of the physical stuff that I experienced postpartum, was what helped me to like sort of gather my body back together. And I feel like that's why, you know, there's such a nice marriage of those two, because they both require paying really close attention.
Mm-hmm.
And Pilates is like annoying sometimes because of how precise it has to be.
Yeah.
And that can be frustrating, but it's also like, oh, that's actually what I need to be really well informed about what I live in, this vessel that I get to live in. So like in me doing a lot of like fancy yoga stuff postpartum was not going to feel good. It was going to do more harm and hurt than anything. So now it's like the postpartum series has elements of yoga from a breathwork, mind space, relaxation. We got to stretch here and there. We got to relax the pelvic floor, right? Do dynamic work too.
Yeah.
But then there's a lot of Pilates infused into it because it's the deep core awareness. It's the like, oh, I can do hard stuff again awareness. And I always think like when I used to teach yoga for CrossFitters,
which I think is hysterical, by the way.
I know.
I love that we both, you know, have this like odd CrossFit yoga thing going on.
And there was a big resistance in the CrossFit community at the time. When I first started it, it was like, what? Those two things do not go together.
But
and in time, they do. They really do. And my husband still does like CrossFit type workouts. I did CrossFit for a few years, but I have an appreciation for it, but it was never going to be my number one, right? And I always said to the CrossFitters, you may not, your number one may never be yoga, but can you get an appreciation for how it provides you space to do the thing that you love more or better? And so I think that Pilates and yoga, when I talk to parents who come to those postpartum classes, I'm like, this may not be your number one. Maybe you really are itching to get back to running. And in that case, go see Carrie, right? Or if you're really itching to get back to, like, I had someone who was really into Irish dance. Like that was her thing she really wanted to get back to. So there's all like so much variety of what people want to do in their bodies. And I'm like, whatever you're going to do, these tools can support that, right? So I'm always like, you don't have to love this forever. It doesn't have to be the thing that you do, but there's a lot of functional, I know that gets a little bit overused, but like functional movement built into this. How are you picking your baby up? You know,
I love a good mashup. I've never been a Kool-Aid drinker, and I think there's so much cool stuff you can take away from pulling a little Pilates and a little yoga and a little CrossFit, and, you know, we'll throw running in there somewhere. Like, I love a good mashup, and there's so much to be gained from kind of all those different things. So
again, it's collaboration, like you were saying, like weaving in the different pieces, and
I love it.
I don't know. I think am I the mat? I know, and I know Megan, Sarah, and I have talked about this a lot. We are really excited to do more collaboration.
You've always been
coming
that
up.
way,
Like just there's so much more that we can do, and I think that is going to make such a big difference and make the village feel more real for a lot of people.
I love it. So, all right, my dear, we can talk for ages, but at the end of every episode, I have a couple questions for you. So book or book you're reading or podcast you're listening to right now?
Ooh, well, they're both birth related, so I don't know.
That's fine.
What those things I'm doing. One of them is called Pushed. Oh, what's her name? Jennifer. The book.
I think I've heard of that one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's real talk. Like if you're curious about real talk about birth right now, that is a good one. There's also a podcast I love called Birth Story Podcast. So again, it's just hearing the stories. Sometimes hearing other people's stories is really helpful. I didn't choose those on purpose. That's just what I'm into right now.
That's your jam. That's totally your jam. I love it. Okay. Favorite activity since becoming a mom, and it doesn't have to be kid related.
Gardening actually is something that I've gotten really into. I'm just looking out the window to my garden over there.
Like this nature down there. I love it.
Kind of. Yeah. We spend a lot of time outside. We have a goal of having 1,000 hours outside by the end of this calendar year. So I try to get them involved, but it's also like something with planting, gardening. I'm not that great at it yet. I try to, again, challenge myself with something new. but it's one of those things that you never know what's going to actually come of it. And I
So
think that we should leave some curiosity for that kind of stuff.
I don't know if you've seen Netflix, The Blue Zones.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that comes up with like longevity is having these physical tasks that you
Hmm.
do kind of every day. And gardening came up in a lot of the different Blue Zones. So maybe you're going to
And
turn,
hands in the dirt is
yeah,
like
you're going to turn
really good for
Alexandria into a
us.
Blue Zone. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it.
I
All right,
hope.
this is going to be hard. One piece of advice for new moms.
Mm. Mm. One piece of advice for new moms: ask for help.
Yes,
I wish I did that more. I still try
me too.
working on it. I
Me
think,
too.
again, it comes back to a question, like, ask for help.
Yeah.
And, like, also one thing to remember, this comes from yoga too, when we don't let people help, I learned this in the last few years, so I don't claim to be awesome at it yet. When we don't let people help, we take away the joy that they get from helping.
Mm,
So it's like taking away something from someone else if we don't allow that.
okay.
So that's a way that I try to remember it so that I might do it more.
Don't take someone else's joy. I like it.
Yeah.
All right. Who is someone kind of in your space, pregnancy, postpartum, even yoga, Pilates, like who is lighting you up right now? Like who should we know about?
Hmm.
Who's an inspiration for you?
I would say you. No,
Yeah.
people already know about you.
I'll pay you later.
Ah, just kidding. Kidding, not kidding. This is lighting me up right now. I'm trying to think of somebody who's like really out there that people could resource, even not locally, right?
We're just gonna put all
Hmm.
the mind the mat people up there. You,
Yeah,
Sarah,
I mean, all the people at Mind,
MBB.
everyone at Mind the Mat's amazing. Megan Brown, Sarah,
Yeah.
Sandra Goot.
Yep.
We love doing things together. But yeah, I mean, I think. Oh, I will say, so this is related.
Yeah.
Sarah and Megan and I are working. There's a Mind the Mat has a new app called
Yes.
Fit Clinic,
Yes.
and we're still getting the word out about the fact that it exists. But on
Hmm.
there are a lot of resources for prenatal and postpartum and therapeutics. Like I'm doing more of the therapeutic type stuff.
Awesome.
And so, yeah, it's a great resource, and anybody can do it from anywhere. And you could subscribe and do some. I think there's a 2-week trial, so
What's it called
that's
again?
a good Fit Clinic.
Fit Clinic. And so if we go
Yep.
to our app store and we go to Fit Clinic, it'll come up.
Yeah, and you can even go to mindthemat.com and scroll down, and it's all right
Love it.
there how to sign up. But yeah, that's a great
Perfect.
resource for anyone that's anywhere.
I love it. I love it. Love it.
Hmm.
Okay. And then finally, what does it mean to you to be an active mom in postpartum?
Mm. Um, Doing a little bit and often,
I
because
like
I can
that.
never do everything I want to do movement wise in the 1 hour.
No.
I just never get to do it that way. So for most days, now that the kids are in school, it's a little different, but it's like 10-minute segments of movement or breath or meditation or
Love
whatever.
it.
It's just keeping active, doing it with the kids. My kids do yoga with me.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
not all
love
the
that.
time because I need to do it separate from them, but also like it's
Yes.
integrating it. Like I'll do it here in the living room on the carpet because
Hmm.
I don't have time to like go downstairs and be on my mat. It's
Hmm.
just make it happen in
And
little
let
bits.
them see it. I, for a
Yes.
long time, was like, I need to have this space, and I have my meditation cushion that just hangs out in the living room, and sometimes it
Hmm.
does become a toy, but, like, let them see that this is what you do. I wish I had done that more,
Yeah,
earlier
that's
on. Like, I
big.
tell them that, like, I know you're just getting up, but I just came back from the gym, and I just came back from a run, or I just sat, or things like that. Like, if they see it, that's really what modeling is, so,
Yeah, and we have I will give a plug for something that's really great as a family.
mhm,
We have these little devices called Zenimal,
mhm.
Zenimal,
Oh,
and it's a
yeah.
mindfulness device. And so it's like the thing that I'm encouraging them to do, like breath work or
Yeah.
whatever, is also reinforced with that. And it's a
Love it.
screen-free device. So they listen to that before bed sometimes. So it's like
Mm.
when I'm doing my meditation, this is what I'm working on. And then this
Yep.
is a way that you can do it. So
Love it.
when my husband does a workout at home outside, like they go and join him. So again, to your
Mm.
point about letting them see it, it's like it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be long. You just have to do it. So
Mic drop right there.
yeah.
Awesome. Caroline, thank you so much.
Yeah.
If you wanna find her on Instagram, you can find her at Caroline Deitch Yoga. Thank you so much. We need to
Yeah.
meet in the same place.
Yeah, let's do that. That
One of
would be
these days.
fun.
I know I
Yeah.
feel like we've been talking about this for forever, even just organizing this. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing all of your stories and everything that you know. And thanks so much for
Yeah.
all that you do for all the moms in the DMV. We appreciate it. Thanks for being on the show.
You too. Thank you.
Did you enjoy the podcast? If so, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes and tell a friend to do the same. Are you a postpartum mom or postpartum pro wanting to know more about getting back to running after baby? Check out all my free goodies on carriepagliano.com. This podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Carrie Pagliano and her guests to the show. The content should not be taken as medical advice and is for entertainment purposes only. Always consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions.